Hi there, and happy Valentine's Day. It's up actually chapter 14 on February 14th. So hope you're enjoying it so far, and here we go. Ochek's camp was a small clearing on the small side of the canyon, no bigger than 10 feet by 10 feet, and surrounded by forest. Trees weren't the only protection. The animal being had created his own snowdrifts, which encircled the camp area and kept a spot clear for the hut. They raised the dwelling, which was constructed out of thin poles and hide that Ochek had carried in his pack, and set up some spruce boughs and bedding inside around a fire pit. Again, Eli built the fire, and once this was all done, they sat around it together. Morgan was thrilled to not only be alive, but to be in front of a fire and under a blanket. She was happy to stay there, warming her arms and hands at the flames and doing nothing else. Her fingers stung as they started to regain feeling, but it was a good sort of pain. Eli joined her there, warming his hands as well. Ochek waited until all the fingers in the hut were thawed out before getting a special treat ready for supper, a reward for such a difficult day. "I've read about this at school," Morgan said with her mouth full. "Pemmican is like deer meat or something, all powdered up and mixed with fat." "That's right," Ochek said. "Pemmican. Too bad there are no berries in it." "It's so good," Morgan said. "It tasted all kinds of amazing, and it was filling, too." "I mean, maybe everything tastes good after almost dying, but it sure beats dried meat and broth." "Oh, don't get too excited," Ochek said. "Depending on what we find here, that might just be what we eat all the way back to Misawa." "Isn't there a spot closer than this for hunting?" she asked, after devouring the pemmican. There was. Ochek chewed at his own supper. "But as time passed, the four-legged ones have either been caught or moved farther away." "Do you think they found the green time?" Eli asked. Ochek shook his head quickly at the idea. "They're just as weak as we are in Misawa, even if they knew where the man went." "Could you find the man, if you knew?" Morgan asked, "if he was far away?" "I'd have to," Ochek said. "But you have to be as weak as the others," Eli said. "Everybody has their role," said Ochek. "Well, like what? Sitting around and doing nothing?" Morgan asked. "There's more to do than hunt," Ochek said, and there was a long pause after this. Ochek, perhaps sensing that both Eli and Morgan wanted to know more, continued. "I was a child when Musqua came to Misawa, and not much older than that when council decided to make him chief. Soon after he became chief, the man entered our village. One of the first decisions Musqua made was whether or not to accept the man into Misawa, and because he wasn't the first human to come to Misawa. The others were good people. So we thought the man would be good as well." "Are they still here, the others?" Morgan asked. "They left many years ago," Ochek said. "Well, where did they go?" Eli asked. "Back to your world," Ochek explained. "They came here in the same way as the man." "Through the attic?" Morgan looked at Eli, puzzled. "Maybe that's why it hasn't been open for so long," Eli said. "Eli, if somebody wanted to lock it shut, they'd use a lock, not a bunch of layers of paint." "Oh yeah, that's a good point." "Exactly how many years ago?" Morgan asked Ochek, ready to do the math. "Like how many notches or whatever." Can I just..." Ochek threw his arms in the air. "I'm trying to tell you children a story. In good time, you'll find out about the others, all right?" "Oh, sorry," Eli said. "Yeah," said Morgan, "keep going, sorry." "The man came with what seemed like good intentions, so he was allowed to live among us. I didn't understand much back then. I was the youngest in the village. After the man left with the summer birds, with Tataku, even after the white time fell on us, there were no other children born. Instead, over time, more and more of us died. We just couldn't have any more mouths to feed. So Ochek, who had been staring into the empty bowl, looked up. I have remained the youngest and the strongest, strong enough to be the one to hunt on the land and provide for others, strong enough to find the man if I only knew where to go. They needed rest before checking Ochek's traps. It had been a long, hard day, walking from Misawa. After Ochek finished his story, they settled in for the night. Morgan lay close to the fire, facing it. She closed her eyes, but despite her exhaustion, did not fall asleep quickly. She listened to the wind outside, its distant hollow song serenading her as it danced through the trees. She listened to the fire crackle softly, like it was trying to be quiet, trying to allow them to rest. Amid these sounds, her mind wandered. She tried to think if this was the first time she'd ever been camping. She was sure it was. A family she'd stayed with a few years earlier, family number 5, she guessed, had gone on camping trips, but hadn't taken her with them. They'd seen fit, just like the family before Katie and James, to send her off to respite instead. What was so awful about her that they would leave her behind and not take her with them? And then she thought, am I awful? Yesterday she had been, she knew that much. She pictured her mother in the tiny room. She imagined herself outside the room, looking at her through the window. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't imagine herself in the room. She couldn't imagine herself in her mother's arms, being sung to, being told in Cree not to forget herself. But what was there to forget? That question, asked like a voiceover to a short film playing in her mind, of her mother in the room and her outside in the cold, was the last thing Morgan remembered before finally falling asleep. In the morning, they ate a quick meal, broth and dried meat, again, no more pemmican, and took down the hut. The wind had returned overnight, and without 3 bodies weighing it down, the dwelling would certainly have flown off into the forest. Depending on how the day went, they'd either set it up again that night in the same spot, or make camp somewhere on the trek back to Misawa. The relentless wind and cold made the hours spent checking traps all the more frustrating. It felt like braving the elements should yield some kind of reward, even the smallest of animals, to bring the villagers. But time and again, they were met with the same reality, an empty trap. There have been many trips like this one, Ochek said at one point, seeing how disheartened the kids were. And there have been trips that have been better. Some help we are, Morgan said to Eli, and then a thought occurred to her. Did you catch anything when you were with him alone, just you two? A couple of times, he said. You being here didn't keep the traps empty, Ochek assured Morgan. Ochek had an empty sack over his shoulders, and it was the saddest thing Morgan had ever seen. A knife was tucked into his belt to prepare the game on the spot. It would then be brought to Misawa to become clothing, utensils, and most important, food. Morgan kept thinking about the racks she'd seen outside the lodges, and how most of them were barren. On they went, making their own tracks, but finding no others, and checking more traps with no animals in them. They had the smallest and least satisfying lunch behind a large tree that offered little protection from the wind and snow, broth made of melted snow, pine needles, and bark. After lunch, more of the same. Morgan began to wonder if she should have come at all, if she shouldn't have just gone off with Eli from Misawa right when she'd found him. All I've done is start to care about them, and they're dying, Morgan said to Eli, quietly enough that Ochek couldn't hear. What good is that? I still wouldn't leave if I had a choice, he said. What? She hit him in the chest. If you stayed, you'd just die too. How does that make any sense? Morgan wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Eli looked at her with a stone face. I'd be more alive here, even if I was dying. Are you listening to yourself? Shh! Ochek hissed at the 2 foster siblings. They stopped fighting. Ochek was crouched down, staring off into the forest through the blustering snow. Without looking at them, without looking away from whatever he saw, he raised a finger and beckoned them over with it. They eased forward with great care until they were at his side. He pointed in the direction he'd been staring. "I don't see anything," Morgan whispered. "Look." Eli pointed too. She peered through the storm until she finally saw it. There was another animal being, standing at one of the traps. It was oblivious to the group's presence. "Maybe you're luckier than you think." Ochek pulled out his knife. He started to move towards the animal. Morgan and Eli followed a safe distance behind, worried they would make a noise. It was a squirrel, maybe a foot shorter than Ochek, and dressed in the same sort of clothing that he wore. Its bushy tail protruded from dark pants, and it wore a long-sleeved, green-hooded top. The children didn't say anything to each other, just exchanged the same upset looks. How was it okay that Ochek planned to kill another animal, a being that walked on 2 legs? He'd talked about 4-legged ones. Presumably, that's what the villagers in Misawa ate. Animals that didn't walk or talk and were the same size as the animals Eli and Morgan were familiar with in their world. This kind of felt like a person killing a person. When Ochek was nearly at the unsuspecting squirrel, with his knife raised and ready for the kill, Eli called out, "Run!" The squirrel leaped to the side in time for the knife to stab into the trap, which was empty. The animal that had been in the trap, a hare, was now in the squirrel's mouth, and very dead, dangling. Ochek glared at Eli, and it sent a shiver down Morgan's spine. Eli backed away, and so did she. "Isn't it one of your own?" Eli asked. The squirrel spat out the hare, and it landed on the ground, kind of chewed up. "Yes, aren't I?" Ochek picked up the hare and stuffed it triumphantly into the once empty sack. "Let her go now," Morgan pleaded. Ochek looked very much as though he wanted to get angry with the children, but instead he took a deep breath. "Children, normally I would agree, but we need this food." "I am not food, thank you very much," the squirrel said, appalled. "Quiet, squirrel," Ochek said. "I have a name, actually." "You might as well eat us," Eli said. "Don't give him any ideas." Morgan slapped Eli on the arm. "Ow! Stop hitting me." "That's not the same," Ochek said. "I'm only trying to do what's best for my village." As he continued to explain his position, the squirrel, in full view of both Eli and Morgan, began to sidestep away very quietly. The foster siblings said nothing, hoping the squirrel would get far enough that when Ochek noticed, it would be too late. He was going on now about the history of his village. Understand that some things will never be the same as before, when each season gave way to the next. We have to do what we can to survive. We honor each animal, 2-legged or 4, that gives of themselves for us. Well, they probably prefer not to, Morgan grumbled. Ochek started to turn towards the squirrel, who was now 10 feet away from them. Morgan reached out and grabbed his shoulder. "Hey, can you tell me about what council would think of this?" Ochek looked at her curiously, but answered, "If council told me not to kill her, I wouldn't. Their rules govern Misawa, and we trust in those rules." "But you were just about to kill her without council telling you that you could," Morgan said. "How does that make sense?" It was impulse," Ochek admitted. "In the end, Eli may have been right to stop me. Because if she was dead and then council told you not to kill her..." "Yes, I know," Ochek said. "I already conceded your point, Esquasis. Well, and another thing," she crossed her arms for effect and tried to think of an actual other thing. While she did, she glanced at the squirrel. She'd not intended to. It gave her stalling tactic away. "Oh, clever girl." Ochek wheeled around to find the squirrel still very slowly trying to escape. When the squirrel locked eyes with Ochek, she froze for a moment, and so did he. Then, like a bullet, he took off after her. She bounded away from him, and it was difficult to tell who was faster. The deep snow didn't impede either of the animal beings, and all Morgan and Eli could do was to keep them in sight as they chased behind. Ochek and the squirrel were quickly no more than specks against a tree-littered horizon, kicking up clouds of white snowflakes like a snowblower. Never mind the two animal beings, Morgan could hardly keep up with Eli. The best she could do was follow in the trail he was making, but even still, her legs started to burn from the pursuit. Finally, after several minutes or forever, the animal being stopped in an explosion of snow. The squirrel was standing on the branch of a tree, just out of reach of Ochek, who was on the ground directly below the branch, knife at the ready. Even though the squirrel was agile, she couldn't run along branches and jump from tree to tree, since she was two-legged and much larger than a normal squirrel. So, she was safely out of reach, but stuck. "You can't stay up there forever," Ochek warned. "That's true," the squirrel said, "but I've just had a bit of a meal, and I should be okay for a while." "Well, so should I," Ochek said. "Can't we just check the other traps for food?" Eli asked. "You're only delaying the inevitable," Ochek said to the squirrel, ignoring Eli. "If I'm going to die," the squirrel said, sitting on the branch, "I might as well enjoy the view." Ochek jumped and tried to grab her dangling feet, but missed. "The view?" Ochek said. "We're in the forest, Eric Watches." "Oh, now you're using my name, Ochek," she chided. "It's not that I don't respect you," Ochek said. "You're a victim of circumstance." "Well, if it's all the same, I'd like for you to call me Eric." The squirrel raised her chin and crossed her arms. "If you respect me so much." "I can't say that you respect me stealing from my traps." Ochek tried to grab Eric's feet again, but failed. "I didn't see your name on them." "You know they're mine." "Can I ask a question, even if you're both super worked up?" Morgan asked. "I'm not worked up. He is," Eric said. "Do you blame me?" Ochek said. "So this has to do with the traps and the hair you had in your mouth, Eric. Why is this even a thing? I mean, I thought squirrels just ate nuts and seeds and stuff." "I will have you know," Eric said, "that when food is scarce, like it has been for many years, squirrels like yours truly here will eat meat. That is, if they're smart enough to catch it." She looked at Ochek with a smirk. "Or know where to find it." "You stupid little squirrel!" Ochek, in his anger, missed Eric by a mile this time, jumping and reaching wildly. Eric laughed at the attempt and then sighed. "The sunset is pretty this time of year. I think I can hang on until then at least." "You just go ahead and hang on. Two can play at that game." Ochek cleared snow away from the base of the tree, busily and angrily making a place where he could wait Eric out while being shielded as much as possible from the wind. "I can sit on the ground longer than you can sit in a tree," he grumbled, sitting down in the makeshift clearing with his back against the trunk and sticking his knife into the wood. The children joined him. Ochek looked sour. His arms were crossed, eyebrows furrowed, and he had an exaggerated frown on his furry, snow-freckled face. "Are you pouting?" Morgan asked. "No," Ochek snapped. "You're totally pouting." "I'm totally not pouting." While all this went on, Eric lay down on the branch and put her arms under her head. She looked, in the midst of the storm, as if she were relaxing in a hammock on a warm summer day. "I could get used to this," she said. "I'm just mad at you both, that's all," Ochek said to Eli and Morgan. We didn't run away from you," Morgan said. "We just don't want you eating something that walks and talks," Eli said. "You've been here for 2 weeks," Ochek, for the first time, sounded tired. "You'd think differently after decades of the white time." "I would not," Morgan said. "Creator gifted us some of us beings with the good words and left many without them. Those creatures have always provided for us, and we honor them for it. They've left the area, and we are dying. I'll do anything to help Misawa survive," Ochek said. "You know," Eric turned on her side, still relaxed as can be, "I've been thinking. Let's say the white time ended. Would you still eat me up?" "What is the point of answering that question?" Ochek was growing more sullen by the moment. Well, if I'm going to die at some point when I get off this branch, why don't you humor me? Fine. Ochek got to his feet. If the wait time ended, no, I would not eat you. He scanned the area as though things really were different, as though instead of snow and wind and cold, there was lush green grass and leaves, warm air, rushing water, and plenty of game. The land would provide everything we'd need. Eric said, I have a follow-up question. Don't push it, Ochek warned. Just one more, I promise. Eric sat on the branch again, her legs kicking back and forth playfully. Let's say that I knew where the summer birds were being held. Would you make a deal with me? Say, let me go in exchange for information? Liar. Ochek leaped in the air and grabbed at Eric, but missed for a fourth time. I mean, I could be lying, but she put a finger on her chin and stroked the fur. What if I'm not? Are you willing to risk it? If you knew where the summer birds are, where the man is, you would have gone there yourself, Ochek said. Not really, she said. Yes, really, he said. Maybe I've been waiting for exactly the right moment. And how many have died while you waited, if what you say is true? Maybe this moment is the only moment that would ever have worked, dear friend, she said. I am not your friend, and how would you know that? He said. After all, she said, it's very far and I have short legs. If you believe nothing else, you have to believe that. Plus, little old me against a big human? Why should I believe anything you say? You're a thief. For the same reason, dear Ochek, that I would trust you and come down from this branch. What other choice do we have? Ochek looked at the children, who had remained sitting and watching the exchange with great interest. He looked at Eric thoughtfully. Your deal is that you tell me and I let you go? In a nutshell, she said. See what I did there? Nuts, squirrel. I want to amend the deal, he said. You tell me, I let you live, but you come with us to where the summer birds are. Us? Morgan wondered how many days that would take, and how many hours on Earth. The most they could be away was a week and a half, and that was very loose math. Hopeful math, the kind she did for quizzes after forgetting to study. Well, we have to help, Eli said to her. Please? How far is it? Morgan asked Eric. It's far, but, far, far. Not like that much, Eric said. Okay, so in miles. And Eric asked, what's miles? Well, like compared from Misawa to here, Morgan said. Let's see. Eric scratched her temple. It's like, Eric, Ochek said, do we have a deal? I want to amend your amendment, Eric said with full-on squirrely duck lips. Ochek looked as if he wanted to pull his fur off. What now? If I'm going to come with you, Eric said, I think it's best I lead you there and not tell you anything at all right away. Male animals and directions, am I right? No, Ochek shook his head violently. No deal. You tell me now, or that's that. Then kill me, she said. You'll be full for a little while, but you'll have to come here again and again and again until forever has gone by and we'll all have died from starvation. Ochek sighed heavily. I don't know. Ochek, she said, don't you think that I want the green time back? Don't you think it's fun? Do you think it's fun for me to steal your food, to live like this in the forever white? Ochek stuck his knife in his belt. Fine, Eric, but if you're lying, I will serve you to the village for a feast, and gladly. Eric jumped off the branch and extended her paw, looking pleased and relieved at the same time. Splendid, she said. We have a deal then? Nothing is done without council's approval, he said. Oh, good, she said. I've heard Misawa is lovely this time of year.